Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. This is our third author reading that we're holding at the library, our new series of events that we're doing. And today we have Josh Howell. He used to work in the ER department, and now he can tell you what his new job is because it's a startup, not-for-profit, and I don't remember. And he just started it a week ago?
2 weeks ago.
Anyway, Josh is a self-publisher, writer who did graphic novel, and he can tell you how he did the graphic novel, how he found his illustrator who's from Italy.
Yeah,
which is like, how do you do that? Anyway, and then talk about projects. So he's going to read some, he's going to talk, and he's available for questions, so
yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself and then do a little reading and we can just chat afterwards. I did work here for the emergency medicine department up until a couple weeks ago. Great campus to work for. I love this place. It is a real pleasure to be a part of it, and then sadly something I had to leave, but there is a new startup downtown called U-Turn, and it works with at-risk youth in the area. I have a background. I worked in juvenile court for a few years and did a lot of mentoring with kids that were in the system and trying to be a part of a community that wasn't as violent as the one they were kind of being a part of that got them into that situation. So a U-Turn definitely kind of spoke to me. It's less than a month old, and it's basically going to work with kids in the school as well as young adults that are marked for violent behaviors, whether they're already in the system or they're likely going to end up in the system. We're there to help them through school if they're currently in school, or help them get their GED and help them find a job as well. And so I'm the executive assistant there working for our 3 directors, and we really have about 4 or 5 people right now, and we're kind of getting our offices set up, and we look to go live in the new year. So it's a lot of work before then, but something I'm kind of pretty proud to be a part of and whatnot. So so this is my book. As she said, it started out as a novel that I couldn't finish. It was in my head for a long time, was hitting walls, and I love comics and I love going to comic conventions. So somebody challenged me to turn it into a comic. And I can't draw to save my life, so I didn't see how that was a possibility. But I was contacted by a publisher up in Canada that wanted to do it. They loved the idea of the story and said, if you can, create the book, we'll help raise the money and get it going. So I auditioned a lot of different artists, locally and not locally, and just kept on having problems. I was willing to raise some money, but some of them wanted, ridiculous amounts that just was unrealistic for someone I've never heard of. Other people were putting their spin too much on it. For example, there's a scene in the beginning where a girl is being held hostage, and the script would say, "Girl tied to a chair." And the artist would send back this girl that was half naked and wearing lingerie and ridiculousness. And yeah, I was like, this is not going to work at all. So yeah, there was a lot of artists that were just keen on over-sexualizing the story, and I didn't think it needed that. So I found a couple of Facebook groups that connected artists with authors. And I found Ilaria, and she was 19 at the time in Europe, in Italy, and she was doing a lot of one-page commissions. So say you really liked an anime character or a game character, she would do something for you for, $20-$40. And so I sent her a couple pages of the script and asked if she was interested, and she asked if there were strong female characters in there, and I said definitely there are, and that kind of sold her. So we raised $6,000 on Kickstarter to pay her. At that time, we were still connected to the publishing company, and they had, a following of their own, but a lot of it was going out, being on radio shows, being on podcasts, going around to local conventions and advertising, the Kickstarter for about 30 days until we raised the money. And then we spent the next 7 months working on the graphic novel. And as soon as it was done, we sent it to the publisher, and nothing happened. They had done all these other successful projects that were in the works as well, and just nothing happened. We didn't hear from them. They turned off their Facebook. They turned off their website, and I was a little worried. I had received some of the money to pay our artist, but the rest of the money that we raised, which is about $2,000 more for production, they had. And they didn't have a phone number for the company. I had a Skype and I had an email, and we had done most of our conversations and our contracts and everything through their Facebook page. So about a month went by, and they said, "Oh yeah, we're still doing it." Another month went by until the time that we were supposed to be giving the books that people had earned through their Kickstarter pledges. We were supposed to be sending those out, and not a book had been printed. In fact, it hadn't even reached the printer. And so they still haven't declared bankruptcy, but that was the theory that that's what happened. They bit off a little more than they could chew. And before I came along, they had a good 15, 20 books that were incredible. And so I was really proud to be a part of it, but clearly something happened. So about 4 months went by, and I snapped, and I couldn't take it anymore. And I kind of did a little researching and found anybody that was ever a part of that company, and kind of did some searching online. And I found emails for other writers that had been a part of it, and also emails for the owner's parents. And yeah, so and he was in his 40s, so his parents were still alive, thankfully. And I emailed his parents, and I said, "Look, I'm not trying to make a big deal, but there's this issue going on, and it needs to be handled." And the next day, I got a check for the money, and was released from contract, and I could breathe and move forward. So thankfully that part is over, but because of that, we had to find our own distribution, and so we went through Amazon. They have a free program called Create Space. Whether it's a color book or a textbook like this, you can sign up, and it's absolutely free, and then they just take a cut. And for a book that's just text, the cut is very small. For a book with color, it's very big. So it's a little harder to do a color book on Amazon, but I can get the book for a little cheaper, and so I go around and try to sell them in person to people and make a little more personal connection. And so that's really how I've been getting the book out. And we can talk about that a little later, some of the conventions I've been to and some of the projects we have coming up. But yeah, so that's the book. And so after that, I went back and finished the novel, which is the thing I was, most wanting to get done. I mean, the comic is great, but there's only so much text in there, and so the book is like my extended director's cut of the story. So yeah, so I have no idea how much time I have to read, but I'll just read a little bit, and then maybe you can give me a signal for when to.
Give us an idea what the story's about.
Okay, yeah, sure, of course. Well, the novel is a sci-fi novel. It's based in today or near future. It's all about Riley Harper. She's a FBI agent, floater. She's on assignment in Seattle to help them track down a local serial killer. And things go crazy, and her partner goes missing, and the more she tries to find him, the more sci-fi stuff happens around her. One of my recent readers from New York told me it was X-Files without the aliens. So I can appreciate that. I don't know if you know X-Files, but the majority of X-Files is not about aliens. And so, yeah, I kind of like that as a compliment. So I'll read from a little bit of the first chapter, and then we can talk more. Okay, so The first body was found under the jungle gym at Green Lake Park, a 16-year-old girl who had been missing for 3 days. The second girl, same age, was found 2 days later after her abduction, piled in a heap on the basketball court of Leshy Park. In both cases, the remains were identical, each limb and every digit sliced and severed. Both bodies in their entirety were riddled with puncture wounds, which ranged in size from needlepoint to the width of a dime. The cause of the wounds could not be determined, as whatever made them appeared to have protruded from the body instead of being projected inward. Other than their age, there seemed to be no identifiable connection or similarity between the two. After the third girl went missing, FBI, missing persons, and serial homicide stepped in to form a joint task force with the local police. In reality, they were there to call the shots of the investigation, which made the department feel like a crowded kitchen. As special agent in charge, Riley Harper found herself trapped in the confines of the media spotlight day in and day out. Every press conference presented the same uphill battle as she attempted to conjure up any kind of good news to feed the reporters. Not only was she under strict orders to keep the public at ease, but also to paint the local police in the best light possible. This, of course, was far from an easy task, as most of the citizens of Seattle viewed the FBI involvement as a sign that the police couldn't do their job. The fact of the matter was that the captor was quite competent. He had managed to grab and dispose of each victim without being seen, and the FBI's presence did not keep him from continuing at an alarming pace. 2 months and 7 girls later, Riley was tired and annoyed. It had become apparent at this point that only a lucky break would give them any chance of ending this. Riley didn't mind being temporarily assigned to Seattle. Being a floater agent within the FBI meant that she was always on the go. When a field office was overbooked, she would receive a temporary transfer to manage the case. She had few constants in her life. Her supervisor, Agent Fisher, remained the same, but she didn't consider that much of a comfort. She had sold her condo in Austin on the fact that she only saw it for a couple weeks out of the year. Save for a drunken uncle, she didn't have a family to miss. She kept a low profile on every assignment and made it a point not to make friends but merely acquaintances. Most of the time, she wouldn't remember a coworker's name after a couple of days of finishing an assignment, and so the pursuit of friendship seemed pointless to her. Her supervisor worried for her, always asking how she managed to get by without making a personal connection with anyone. The truth was, she did get lonely, but she found ways of getting past that, diving deeper into her work and finding someone to sleep with. The nature of the job didn't allow for much personal time, so Riley eventually adopted a routine of picking a suitable companion from the crop at the office. She knew it wasn't ideal to mix business with pleasure, but she never stayed in one place long enough to feel the repercussions. It usually wasn't too hard to find a willing and impressionable young officer to fill the role. In this case, it was young P1 Peter Drake. Peter was fresh out of the Seattle Police Academy, looking to make a name for himself. Riley knew he was keen enough to realize the potential for him to move up the food chain if he stuck close to her. He was smart enough to keep his mouth shut, and in return, she would give him high praise and recognition when the job was done. To his credit, Peter wasn't like most of the men who had accepted this deal. Most cases involved the guy getting too close for her liking. In this case, Riley had actually developed an attraction in return. There was a certain attachment that felt more than friends with benefits, something that she hadn't felt in some time. She knew it wasn't a feeling she should continue to entertain, and should have broken it off weeks ago, but the sex was cathartic and their arrangement was convenient. Riley hated sleep, or at least the dreaming part of it. Her dreams were vivid and always of the disturbing kind. She couldn't help but feel jealous of people who could wake up without remembering or knowing if they had dreamed during their slumber. She woke every time alarmed and relieved, alarmed at the content, relieved to find it was just a dream. At the age of 33, she could honestly say that she had more horrible memories than good. Her occupation forced her to remember each and every gory detail and every sick revelation of every case she had encountered. She associated her general lack of trust, lack of empathy, and lack of optimism with her inability to forget the things she had seen. so it was no surprise to her that it eventually developed in her dreams. Tonight was no different, which made her less irritated to be woken by the piercing screeches and blinding light of her phone. "This is Agent Harper," her voice croaked as she answered the phone. "I need you to come in. There's been another abduction." Sitting up on the edge of her bed, Riley flicked on the lamp. Police Chief Daniels wasn't known to be a night owl, so Riley knew he must have something. A groan rang out behind her, which she quickly silenced by ramming an elbow between the sheets. "We've got a description this time. Some lucky punk survived a bullet. I'm calling for maximum deployment till we catch the prick." "Yes, Chief, I'll be there in 15. "Actually, I need you to swing over and pick up your P1. I couldn't reach him." Riley rolled her eyes. That was because his phone was in her kitchen and he was passed out in her bed. "Yes, sir, will do." She hung up the phone and walked into the bathroom. Another groan rang out as she flicked on the light switch. "Can it, Peter? Chief wants us to come in. There's been another abduction, so get up." She splashed some cold water on her face and stared at herself in the mirror. At her age, Riley felt like she looked at least a decade older. Her red hair fell to her shoulders and desperately needed some attention. She splashed some more water over her face, attempting to get rid of the bags under her eyes. It was enough that her cheeks were riddled with freckles, a constant source of hilarious jokes in her school days, but she didn't need to show blatant signs of fatigue across her face. By the time her eyes focused on the mirror, she could see Peter already pulling on his pants on the side of the bed. She had to admit he was efficient. She took a swig of mouthwash and spit it as she fought off the temptation to jump into a hot, quick shower. The chief's tone was still ringing in her head, so instead she headed to the closet. "You don't think the chief knows about us, right?" Riley did her best to ignore Peter's paranoid rant as she buttoned her shirt. "I mean, I haven't told anyone." No, he couldn't know. "I don't have time for your insecurities, Peter. Grab my keys and let's go." Throwing on her suit jacket, Riley walked out of the bedroom and down the hall to find Peter in full patrol uniform working on the coffee pot. She smirked. She knew the kid didn't even like coffee. "It's fine, Peter. We'll stop at the diner at the off-ramp." Peter tossed her the keys as he abandoned the coffee maker and threw on his coat. The rain was cold as the two sprinted for their car on the curb. Almost in sync, Riley started the car and Peter worked the heat. Like digging for the surface after being buried by an avalanche, Jessica desperately struggled to lift the weight of her eyelids. When she could finally open them, she found that she still couldn't see due to a thick wool sack that had been placed over her head. Her fatigue began to fade as her panic set in. Strapped to a wooden chair, her hands were tied around her back, with her knees and ankles tied to the chair legs. After a moment or two of struggling, she sat defeated, cold, alone, and confused. She tried to speak, but couldn't muster any more than a whimper. It was only then that she heard something shuffle behind her, and she realized she was not alone in the room. "Hush now, Miss Davis. You're on television." The deep voice came from behind her and echoed within the room. She heard a click, and the TV to her left came alive in the middle of a news report. The wool sack was pulled from her head, allowing Jessica to see herself on the screen. As yet another abduction has taken place here in Seattle, Jessica Davis, age 17, was taken from a Taco Bell parking lot earlier this morning. The tip was brought to police by a fellow student of Jessica's who was rushed to the hospital with a gunshot wound. His condition is unknown at this time. Jessica used to despise the voice of this female newscaster from Channel 8. She had always found the voice to be incredibly dull and monotone. Now she couldn't help but cling onto every word. Moments ago, the Seattle Police Department, in cooperation with the FBI, issued an official statement naming Harold Jensen as the prime suspect in the kidnappings. Jensen has briefly served as a substitute teacher over the last few months within 3 of the local high schools. Jensen is reportedly driving a red pickup truck. If you have any information as to the whereabouts of Jessica Davis or Harold Jensen, we ask that you call the number at the bottom of the screen. That's enough of that. Harold turned off the television. Jessica's neck ached so much that it was hard to move her head and see what Harold was doing behind her. Harold suddenly grabbed the back of her chair, making her whimper and close her eyes as he turned her around. Jessica tried to believe that she'd be safe. so long as she kept her eyes closed. When she heard another whimper in the room, she decided she could no longer keep them closed. What she saw, however, only caused her to scream again. Across the room was another girl, approximately the same age, hanging upside down by a rope from the ceiling. Jessica recognized her as a girl from the west part of town who had gone missing a week or so ago. The girl seemed to be waking up from her own inertia and began to cry once she realized she was still in the same nightmare. Harold was standing at the table, pressing the needle of a syringe into a vial of dark liquid. The other girl followed Jessica's eyes until she too saw the syringe and began to scream through the gag tied around her face. "What the hell is this?" screamed Jessica, but Harold ignored her as he grabbed the hanging girl by her thick blonde hair and pulled her head towards him. Jessica screamed, begging for him to stop, as Harold pressed the needle into the girl's left tear duct and injected the contents of the syringe. "What are you doing to her, damn it?" "Shut your mouth, Jessica. You'll find out soon enough." Harold put down the syringe and grabbed a stopwatch from the counter. He stepped back and watched the girl as she began to convulse. Only a couple minutes went by before the girl began to leak blood from her nose, mouth, eyes, and ears. Her moans turned into rabid screeches of pain. Jessica matched her screams as she saw black thorns begin to break through the surface all over the girl's body. The thorns varied in size and length, but seemed to burst from beneath every inch of the girl's skin. The girl's scream died down as she drowned in her own blood. The convulsing finally stopped, and Harold threw down the stopwatch to the ground, clearly disappointed. Grabbing a knife, he cut the rope and sent the girl's body crashing to the floor. After staring at her for a moment, Harold turned and looked at Jessica. "Perhaps you'll be different." I think that's enough for now. So I'll tell you one thing, the rest of the book is not like that, obviously. But one of the things I wanted to do, there's a clear story that has nothing to do with Seattle or what's going on. But my mom, one of her favorite shows is the Law & Order SVU. And it almost always starts off with something that's horrible and violent. And then the more you watch it, it turns into something else. So that's kind of what I was trying to do with the beginning of the book. And it does set a tone, but the rest of the book is a little more drama than horror. And yeah, it was exciting to write it that way. So.
Josh, how did you start writing?
I've been writing since I was a kid, especially in elementary school. Every time we got a project of, write a one-page story, I'd turn in 10. It really came apparent, I think, in 5th or 6th grade. We had a story project, and you were supposed to try your best to provide your own illustrations and work on the story throughout that part of the semester. And I turned in this story about an earthquake in Council Bluffs and these kids that were trying to survive it, and it was so intense. And my teacher said that it was very impressive and that to reach out to her when I write my first book. And ever since then, I've just been writing. In high school, I was part of the newspaper, did a lot of articles for them. We had a yearly publication of short stories and poems that I loved to be a part of. In college, I took a lot of creative writing classes. And it was just, trial and error. Try to write as much as I can, and if it's something I can put together, then I will. And in high school, I had a girlfriend all 4 years. She was my high school sweetheart, and for her the 3rd year anniversary, I wrote her a full-length fantasy novel, and had that published when I was in the military after high school. And I have learned to despise that novel so much. It's for multiple reasons. First of all, the 2 main characters are my name and her name, and we are not together, and don't like each other at all. Right, and then on top of that, it was horribly written. I wrote it all in first person. And instead of one book in one first person, every time I wanted to talk about another character, I would go first person to that character. And it made sense in my head, but it was really confusing to the reader. So I put that aside, and then the military was a very busy part of my life, and so I stopped writing for a while. And then when I kind of came back to civilian life, I kind of refound the flame and started working on different stories, and came up with this. And then now that this is done, I've actually started rewriting that first book because I'd like to change it up a bit and write it and better. And now that I've matured as a writer, and so that's trying to go back to that route and fix that, and then I can move forward freely. So, yeah. Sir.
Is she a villain in the story?
No. Yeah, if she was a villain, I'd keep it. Yeah. Yeah. I know, right? No, I am removing the names. I'm changing the book. It'll be in the third person, past tense, and yeah. But good idea. That could be. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how do you do your research? So for example, with what you just read, and just kind of, how do you approach the things that you don't know? How do you fill in that? Sure.
Well, I'm a crazy movie and TV lover. I have bookcases full of movies and bookcases full of books, and my life has always been flooded with media. So I've read a lot and I've seen a lot, and so I have ideas of certainly Hollywood's take on, and then things like that. Like, I have no idea what police ranks are, so you just have to, there's an amazing tool called Google, and you use that. And for some of the things, I would just have pages and pages of notes and say, when I get to this part, I'm going to refer to these notes. And some things I just, wing it, and if it sounds good to me, we'll go that. There's people like Tom Clancy and whatnot that went in so much into detail that it did hit a certain amount of group. I really like that, but there was also groups that were just too much detail and took them out of the story, and so I try to balance that, and so it can be as real as I want it to be. So, yeah. Any other questions? I have been on the road a lot lately. So the graphic novel came out in July, and the novel came out in September. So I've been trying to go around to a lot of conventions locally in Des Moines, in Omaha, in Kansas City, in Chicago. Just comic book conventions and book conventions to get the word out. It's nice that it's on Amazon, but really, at least to get it started, you have to be there in person, and especially for reviews. There's so many people that I've met that will not buy a book if there's not a review on Amazon or a review on Goodreads, which is fine. You want to look up a review, but it's hard if it's a brand new book and there's nothing out there. So I try to get out there, I try to meet people, and if they really like the book, I stay in contact with them. We did that with New York Comic Con in October. It's now it is the largest Comic Con in the world. It used to be second to San Diego, but it's increased so much in size. Over 190,000 people go to this thing a year from all over the world. And I justified the trip because it was also a 3-year anniversary with my wife. So I didn't think it was going to be profitable. I just wanted to get a table and get the word out. And it turned out to be very profitable, and there was a lot of interest there. And it's wonderful to meet people in such a crazy format and have them walk by your table and you give your little spiel. And then, 2 days and tens of thousands of people later, some of them come back and they say, we were intrigued and we want to try it out. And so then you just try to keep in contact and, Twitter and Facebook and everything, networking, and get a review, and then they pass it on to somebody else. And that's just kind of been my life for the last 5 months, and will be for a while more. I've got some other events coming up. We just had Midwest Comic-Con was this past weekend in Des Moines, and we're having a smaller Comic-Con at Offutt Air Force Base in December. for a few days, and then we'll be going to Chicago in April. There's a big one there with about 90 to 100,000 people every year, and so that's just kind of my life at the moment. And when I'm not at work or working on something else, I'm preparing for the next big event, so that's what I've been doing. Oh. Hi.
Do you use a storyboard, or what do you do when you're developing your story?
I used to use a storyboard. Every writer's different. There's pros and cons to how you write your book. I do still kind of map it out a little bit because I want to make sure I like the flow of it. When I used to write stories, I would be so engrossed into how it's flowing, I'd forget, how to end it. Like every chapter should try to end on some type of cliffhanger that gets your reader to go to the next chapter. And so I had to learn to kind of story map that out a little bit. But I've known myself, and I've known with other writers, if you story map it too much, you'll never actually write it. There's people that I know that have journals of story maps for all these books, and they just can't get to actually writing it because they want every detail in their story map already done. So I try to do, 1 or 2 sentences for each chapter, what I generally want to see happen, and then I just try to start writing it. And if it happens, it happens. If not, then, I'll put it in some other part of the book. So there is a pro and con to it, but a lot of the time I would suggest just take down a couple notes and start writing, and once you get the book done, then you can go back and add stuff or take away stuff and put more research and more thought into it. But if you don't have your first draft, you'll never have your first draft. And that stops a lot of people from, making their own book to begin with. So.
Are you looking at doing a series?
Yeah. The graphic novel, that'll probably be a one and done. It costs so much to make it, and Ilaria is great. We agreed on a deal of $30 a page, and that was for color, ink. She drew it, everything but the text, and that is unheard of. I mean, most people charge, even in the amateur world, charge $100 to $150 to do one of those jobs, a page. So one person will charge $100 to draw it, another person will charge $100 to ink it, another person will charge $100 to color it, and all of a sudden you have, and this was supposed to be a 200-page book, so I just couldn't do that. And the people that were willing to do it all wanted $300, $400 a page to do it all. And so I was I just didn't think it was going to happen because I don't have that kind of money. I don't at all. But I found her, and she loved the story so much, and she's never done anything like this before, so it was kind of a personal challenge. And the fact that once it was done, her name was going to be on a book that was available worldwide. So it wasn't just it's credit for you. We were wanting to pay her something, but now she's booked for the next 3 years, which I'm so happy for her. And she said she'd give me a discount for something later down the road, but it'd still be expensive. So I wrote the graphic novel to be a one-and-done story. The novel I did write to be be a series, or at least maybe not a series, but at least have a sequel. I'm currently working on a book that I started on in college, and it actually ties into this. I was struggling for a long time what story I was actually going to tell, so I picked this story. But there's another story that flows into this that's kind of same universe, same world, but not the same characters, and it comes before this. So I think I'm working on that right now to be a little prequel, and then we might have one more book as a sequel to kind of put a nail in the coffin. But I have other books in mind that I'd really like to put a lot of more work into, and so we'll see how it goes. So yeah.
Have you met with, or just, I'm relatively new to Omaha, but in terms of the local bookstores and things like that, how do they respond to self-published authors? Are they receptive to that if they're local?
Yeah, well, Legend Comics up the street here on Leavenworth, great place. When I came back from the military, I was going to another comic book store. I won't name them because I don't like shaming people, but I would go there on a weekly basis to get my comics, and I'd be a stranger every time. So then a work of fate happened. I had the most nightmarish date with someone from high school. It's horrible, just the most horrible thing I've ever been on. Dropped her off. Across the street it was still in the strip mall by across from Valentino's, was this comic book store that I'd never heard of. And I walked in and I just loved it. It was a hole in the wall place. And by the second or third time I was there, they knew my name, and they wanted to know more about their customers. And now they've taken over the Woolner's building on like 52nd and Leavenworth. And so I've kept in contact with them, and they love to support local people. So they have a whole section of their big store that's books and comics. And they, they're even willing to lose some money to get some of your books on their shelves just to support the local people. So I know them for certain. And the novel is so new, I haven't really had a chance to get it to other bookstores. Some of the other comic stores have been willing, but it is someone's going to lose money, and so it's kind of hard to get that into some stores. But I'm happy with Legends. They're a great place. They won an Eisner Award for the best comic book retailer in the world 2 years ago because of all the charity work that they do. So having it on their shelves is enough for me right now. Yeah, definitely.
Are you reading anything right now?
Am I reading anything? Yes. Justin Cronin is an author. He wrote The Passage, I think 6 years ago. He was doing these small little romance novels that were getting some acclaim somewhere in the world, but weren't really putting him on the map. And his 6-year-old daughter told him to write a book about vampires, and a little girl would be the main character. And he wrote this mammoth of a book called The Passage. And before it even hit the shelves, Ridley Scott and all these people were doing this huge auction to buy the movie rights. And I mean, Mr. Cronin got about $400 million just for that before it touched a shelf. So I had to read that book. And the third one just released this year. It's called... what is it? It's called The City of Mirrors. So it was The Passage, The 12, and The City of Mirrors. And it's just this story about the world being taken over and these survivors dealing with it. And the vampires are a vehicle, but it's a drama. So that's what I'm reading right now. Yeah. And it's so long, and I don't really have a lot of time, so it takes me a while to read stuff now unless I can get the audiobook and play it in my one earphone at work, So, yeah. Sir?
Oddly enough, Fred just told me that's 26 hours on audio.
Oh, yeah, no joke.
But you said science fiction. See, I'm a kind of hardcore, pure science fiction kind of person. Mm-hmm. And yours kind of goes into fantasy a little for me.
It does.
You got vampires, So
it's true.
What's your thought? Do you write either way?
Yeah, I don't like to. I'm not going to only stick to one genre. I think science fiction is, I guess, the best way to describe these books. But yeah, there's a little science in there, but it's mostly fantasy and drama. And I think some of the best movies and stories out there are labeled one genre, but they're not really. For example, Jane Seymour was in town on Friday to present her movie Somewhere in Time that she did back in the 70s with Christopher Reeve. She was at the Joslin, and my mother and I went and saw that. And one of the best things about that movie is it's a time travel movie written by Richard Matheson, the guy that wrote I Am Legend. Nobody remembers it as a time travel movie. They remember it as a romance, So, yeah, my books will probably have a label of a certain genre, but I like to add in enough stuff that it's, a mix of things. So, yeah, I appreciate that more. So,
Did you, have you used any of your military background? Like why the FBI agent and not like a soldier or something?
FBI agent made more sense, you know. I do have a thing sometimes being in the military, you know, you just kind of know things. And of course the civilians know this too, but every time I see a movie where like the CIA is investigating somebody in the United States, I can't stand it because that's not what they do, right? CIA, well, they're not supposed to do that, yeah. Yeah, right. CIA is outside, FBI is inside. It just made sense to do an FBI. And also, while I wasn't trying to copy the X-Files, I love the X-Files. And so I tried to put little nods into things that I loved in this book. For example, Legend Comics took over the old Woolner's building, and there's a abandoned Woolner's grocery store in the book where in the beginning where the serial killer hangs out. And there's an old lady in the beginning of the book named Mona. She's named after a cashier down in the cafeteria that I really like. She's just nice. And so yeah, I think the FBI agent was more just it made sense story-wise, and then it was a nod to something I appreciated. So, but yeah, as far as my military background, it was an experience for me, but it wasn't what I wanted it to be. When I came I was a junior in high school. I knew that I needed to go to the military to have a career or at least get into college. And I had some of the highest scores on my ASVAB, and they told me you could be whatever you wanted to be. And I wanted to be a paralegal. And the month before we went down to basic after I graduated, we got a new recruiter. And he didn't really care for his job. He thought it was punishment. And I believe to this day that he messed up our scores, because when I got down there, I was not offered paralegal. I was offered other jobs. And so I picked fuel systems mechanic. And the next day I learned there was more than one type of wrench. And so, yeah, I appreciated the things that I learned in the military, but it wasn't something I wanted to continue as a career. And you'd have to wait too long to be considered to switch jobs and whatnot. And while they did recognize some of my other strengths, and I worked for administration, I worked for the base commander and whatnot in my later years, 4 years came around and it was just time to depart. So came home and went to school to be a paralegal, and while I'm not doing that now, I think it's helped me in getting the jobs that I have and whatnot. So I do appreciate the time I spent in the military. It was all overseas. It's a year in Korea and 3 years all over Europe. And so I don't despise that part of my life, but I'm glad it's just a part of my life. And maybe I'll reflect on it later, but not yet. So, yeah. Yes, Mom.
My favorite movie was The Killing, and I noticed, she had
Oh, gosh.
and she was in
Did I have yeah. Mom's.
I still have not recovered from that.
Yes. Mom's, one of her favorite shows is The Killing. It was on AMC, and then Netflix finished it. And that was a little nod to you. So, yeah. Because the rest of the book, I mean, literally the first 14 pages are in Seattle. The rest of it has nothing to do with Seattle or that case or that guy. It's just an intro. And so, yeah, I threw that in there to nod to The Killing, which I love too. And red hair, I just like red hair. So it happens to be how it worked out. Sure. Yep.
Any other questions? Yeah, I'm going to go pick a box and we can have our drawing.
Oh, yeah, please. I will say I'm not allowed to sell books here today. So if you would like a book, they're very expensive on Amazon. The novel is not expensive. I sell it for the same price. But the graphic novel, this book isn't even on Amazon, and this is like a private printing of the book. But I do have these cards out there. If you want to connect with me, I sell them for a lot cheaper, and so I'd hate for you to lose money on Amazon. It's just ridiculous how their minimum pricing works. So you can pick one up at the table and reach out to me later, and we can get you a book. But yeah, we're gonna do this drawing thing.
Yeah, this is a new little contraption. I didn't know how to do it.
But it's nice you have the little key thing. Most of the time you have to tape it in the back.
Yeah, this is the full size, the original graphic that we got through. And how much was this? It was like
$45.
$45, I mean, that's now I know why there's so much. If you have to pay somebody so much, $300. Like one person draws, one person paints. God, that's a life.
Yeah, but Amazon does have minimum pricing, and that the minimum was 44, and so I wanted to make 90 cents on the book, and so I put it to 45. But it's because it's color, and this is a book we did with the Kickstarter money on a private printing, and so the colors pop more. It's the best version of the book. But even to put something on this size on Amazon, it was $35. So I thought, either put a small book or go 10 more up and get the biggest trim they had. So that's why we did that. We've also got a black and white version that was able to be sold for a lot cheaper. And there's people that like black and white comics, so we made that. But that's just the things you have to do when you put it on Amazon.
So can I ask you what technically you said you sign up with this thing with Amazon?
Mm-hmm.
So they do the actual printing for you?
Yes, printing, distributing, all that stuff. You set it up, you give them the cover image, or you can pay them to design it. You give them the interior file, which is usually like a PDF of some kind. It goes through this automated process, takes about 24 hours, and if it's accepted and you don't need to change the margins or anything, then you go on towards payments, and they tell you how much it'll cost to make and distribute. Then you can decide the price after that to see if you want to make a profit, and then you choose where you want it to be, and if you want it to be digital, and what countries you want it to be in. And it sounds confusing, but it's very easy, and it's free. And so, I mean, there are other ways, and there is still traditional publishing, but it's something you have to get an agent for. And if you want to get your word out, or at least your first book, and get it out on the stands, then this is a way to do it. So that's how I went.
So like going to the comic book, like in New York,
Mm-hmm.
were there a lot of people like you, the self-published or published through Amazon?
Yeah. Well, I was in the small press booth section, so there were about 50 tables of people that did that, and all the smaller conventions I go to. I have heard of other websites that do color that I'm looking into, but even with all the stuff you have to go through with Amazon, the fact that you could get this book in any country in the world is kind of incredible, and so you still have to do a lot of work at getting your book out there and telling people about your book. But if a person goes to a Comic-Con and they spend all their money and they say, well, how do I get your book? You say, it's on Amazon, and bam, it's a great way to do it. So yeah, I think it's a great tool, and the fact that it's free. My first book, I went through a self-publishing company in Kansas, and I had to pay them $900 some bucks to print the book and to have it in their store and everything, and I made pennies on the book. And while I'm not making a huge profit on these books, they're more convenient, they're more available, and it's an easier process, and I didn't have to pay a dime to set it up. So, yeah.
You mentioned you needed reviews. Don't you guys just got to get together in that room there, review?
You'd think it was like that. No. Yeah. Well, and especially sites like Goodreads, you can click on somebody and be like, oh, they're just buddies, so let's not trust that. So I don't do that very much. There's some people that just like to trade, and you help me and I'll help you, and if I really do like the book, of course I'll do that. And even on Kickstarter, I learned a lot about scams through this whole process, Kickstarter, stuff like that, and you have to, I'm not trying to be rude. I appreciate everybody's art and work, but you have to kind of be there to be independent and to work for yourself. And I don't come from a very rich family. I don't have a lot of money. I'm still doing 8 to 5, and so when I go out there, I try to put it into real people's hands and try to keep in contact and ask them to review it down the line. Yeah. It's a lot of work, but I think it's worth it. So, yeah.
Okay, well, this one, and you get to pick either the full novel or the graphic, the first person poem,
Oh yeah.
and it's Greg.
Nice.
Which one do you want?
I've never read a graphic novel in my life, and I'm colorblind, so I don't want to run the.
No, okay.
So
Yeah.
I'll do that.
Okay. Great.
So you sign it.
I will. Yes. Afterwards. Sure. No problem. That's fine. I do have a black and white comic though. For later.
And Alyssa, and she's not here, but that's okay. We'll just hold it for her, so.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
Do you want to do one more for the people that are here? I can give another book
Okay.
away. Let's do it.
we'll find something. Angie. Oh, there we go.
Yay, Angie! I worked with Angie in emergency medicine, so sweet. Did you want a graphic novel or a novel? I don't know. It's up to you. Well, you can look through them too and decide. It doesn't matter. Okay. It's special. It's a limited edition, yeah.
So,
Fun.
Just to close up, I just wanted to mention, we talked about Legend Comics, and how helpful they were. They do a lot of charity stuff, and
Yes.
they donated a bunch of comics and things for the children on the pediatric floor here, for Halloween, because you can't give them candy. So one of their owners, so that's really cool. That's one thing that she likes to do.
She is. She's a great person.
Yeah,
They're all
it's
great
really a
people.
cool
Yeah.
store, so. So I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank Josh. And he's gonna be doing a podcast. You're gonna start the podcast thing.
Oh yeah.
Talk about your podcast.
Sure. So, well, I am a part of a podcast. It's in Omaha. There's so many podcasts in the world, but it's called Daydream Instruction Manual. It's actually been going on for a while. I just joined it over the summer. But one of the projects we're about to do is an audio drama of the book. I had a lot of people saying, is there an audio book? And I'm like, no, there's not. I'm a guy from Omaha. It's not like I have a company to do that. But I reached out to the podcast, and in the past they've done full-on audio presentations for like Christmas, and they bring in a lot of local voice actors, and they get sound effects, and they make it a huge production. And I love that. I love audiobooks. The Thrawn trilogy from the 80s, Star Wars books. They went and did a huge audio presentation of that with sound effects and voice actors and the score and everything. And so, for the people that don't really like one voice in their ear for the whole book, this is something a little more. So we are going to start that up, I believe in December or January, where we'll release the book in chapters, episodes on the podcast. We've already got some voice actors lined up, and then we'll have it for free, and then when we reach the end, we'll have it available for a little bit, probably for about a year on Amazon as a one, audio drama book. So that's kind of exciting. I'm really excited about that. I thought it was a great idea. And so, yeah, we literally just talked about that on Sunday. So that's a brand new thing that we're excited to work on. So that's coming up. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.